Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're jumping into a really fundamental question, something humans didn't always ask. Why are we, well, the way we are?
It's fascinating, isn't it? For ages, people just accepted their world, myths, stories. They provided all the answers needed. Questioning the setup wasn't really on the table.
Exactly, but then things started to change, quite dramatically. Our mission in this deep dive is to unpack that fascinating history, how humans started to scientifically study themselves.
We'll be looking at anthropology, where it came from, how it evolved across the globe, and its really unique path in India.
We're digging into our source material to pull out the key insights for you. The goal is to help you understand how this field got started, its sometimes surprising links to big historical moments, and honestly, why it matters for understanding ourselves today.
And we want to make these sometimes complex ideas really clear, give you those aha moments, but without drowning you in jargon or too much detail.
Okay, so let's get into it. It seems obvious now, maybe, to study society, but for a long time it just wasn't done.
Yeah.
What do you think really sparked that shift? Why did people start thinking societies could be studied, that they weren't just fixed?
That's the core question, really. It largely kicks off with Europe's Age of Reason. Starting around the 16th century, think exploration, trade. Europe's worldview was literally expanding.
So, seeing more of the world.
Definitely. Exposure to vastly different cultures planted seeds of doubt about their own way being the only way. Plus, there was growing dissatisfaction with the church's traditional authority and rules.
And big events must have played a part too.
Oh, absolutely. The American and French revolutions were huge. They were like real-world proof that social order wasn't God-given. People could actually overturn it, rebuild it.
Wow. So it wasn't just intellectual anymore, it was happening.
Exactly. And seeing all these diverse societies, different looks, different customs, different organizations, it hammered home that there wasn't just one natural way for humans to live together.
So people started thinking, maybe society evolves, even before Darwin.
Precisely. French thinkers, Scottish Enlightenment philosophers, they were already kicking around ideas about social evolution, seeing society as a human creation, not a divine one.
Like Auguste Comte.
Yes, Comte's a key figure. He proposed this three-stage theory. Societies moving from a theological stage, explaining things via gods, to a metaphysical stage, focusing on abstract concepts, and finally reaching the scientific stage based on reason and observation.
Interesting. And then there was Herbert Spencer.
Right. Spencer took this evolutionary idea and ran with it, maybe a bit controversially. He argued societies function like natural systems, weaker parts just get eliminated. Survival of the fittest.
Which everyone links to Darwin, but Spencer used it for societies first.
He did, yeah. And here's the critical part. Spencer's idea, this seemingly scientific concept, got twisted to justify things like aggressive industrial capitalism and colonial expansion.
So it implied some societies were naturally superior, destined to rule.
Exactly. It painted domination as a natural outcome, a stark warning, really, about how scientific ideas can be misused politically. Always question those natural order claims.
That makes sense. And this ties into the positivist approach.
It does. Comte, Spencer, and others really champion this idea. They believe you could study societies objectively, like a biologist studies an organism, look for predictable laws, patterns of evolution.
So it treats society like a science experiment, almost.
In a way, yeah. And this thinking was pervasive. You see echoes of it even in figures like Freud and Marx trying to find scientific laws for human behavior and history.
Now, another big idea from this era was the nature-culture split, right? And how it got mapped onto gender.
Oh, absolutely. A really influential and problematic dichotomy. Reason was framed as masculine, linked to conquering nature, defining civilization itself.
While women
were often linked to nature, instinct. Thinkers like Freud, even Darwin to an extent, portrayed women as less guided by reason. This helped confine women, conceptually at least, to the domestic sphere, while men dominated intellectual life.
And you could see how that would shape who got to do the studying of society early on.
Right, definitely. It baked in a bias from the start. It's why so many foundational Western theorists were men. Their perspective was often presented as the universal perspective.
So anthropology emerges formally in this context, out of this curiosity about human origins, evolution, the science of man, as they called it.
Right, and that name itself carries assumptions. 1, humans can be scientifically dissected. 2, human often implicitly meant man.
And crucially, this is happening right when European colonization is hitting its peak.
The timing isn't accidental. The relationship with colonized peoples shifted. Take the British and India. Early on, during trade, there was often respect, even admiration.
Then,
Once colonial rule solidified, attitudes changed. Indian culture was often denigrated, labeled savage or uncivilized, all while Enlightenment ideals of equality were supposedly being championed back home. A massive contradiction.
it really raises that question again. How can objective science justify power imbalances?
It's a critical question. And sadly, these early evolutionary theories were used that way. They created this image of the primitive other, placing non-European societies on lower rungs of a ladder, with Europe at the top.
Justifying dominance as progress, essentially.
Pretty much. Spencer's survival of the fittest played right into it. Some thinkers even saw things like matrilineal societies where descent is traced through women as backward, conveniently fitting that Malreason female nature split we talked about.
Okay, so the discipline gets formally established. Edward B. Tyler at Oxford. What were the initial goals?
Formally, it was about studying human origins, human diversity, both biological and social evolution. Tyler also floated the idea of the psychic unity of mankind, a shared basic human intelligence.
But still with that hierarchical ladder in the background.
Often, yes. Even with psychic unity, some groups were seen as stuck on lower rungs. From this base, the field started to branch out.
Let's talk about those branches. The British school first. Structural functionalism.
Right. Influenced by French sociology, particularly Durkheim, they moved away from grand speculative evolutionary histories. Their focus, empiricism. Get out there, collect facts.
The field study method.
Exactly. That became central. Their core idea was that societies are structured systems, like bodies, with different parts, institutions, customs, each serving a function to keep the whole thing stable.
And they pushed for cultural relativism.
They did. The idea that you can't judge cultures as higher or lower, each is a functioning whole, logical in its own context. Study it on its own terms, not by comparing it to Europe.
The colonial connection was still strong.
Undeniably. Many British anthropologists worked in colonies, sometimes funded by the government. The idea was their insights could help administrators govern more effectively, maintain stability.
Some administrators even became anthropologists themselves, right?
Yes, in places like India, though their work often carried the biases of their administrative roles. It's complex, though, because despite those ties, some anthropologists, through deep engagement with the people they studied, ended up advocating for them, challenging harmful policies. Verrier Elwin is a great example in India, influencing Nehru's government on tribal policy.
Interesting. So a discipline born partly out of colonialism could also become a voice challenging it sometimes.
It highlights the tensions, the contradictions inherent in its history. Now, contrast that with the American cultural tradition.
Different context there.
Very different. In the U.S., the focus was often on Native American groups whose societies had been severely disrupted, even destroyed, by colonization and expansion. Anthropologists were often studying remnants, myths, languages, folklore.
So less focus on functioning wholes.
Less opportunity to, in many cases. This led to Franz Boas, often called the father of American anthropology. He drew on German ideas about how culture spreads diffusionism. He stressed history, migration.
And a particularistic view. What's that?
Historical particularism, meaning understand each culture as the unique product of its specific history and environment. Don't try to shoehorn it into some universal evolutionary stage.
Boas and his students really developed the concept of culture, didn't they?
Hugely important. Alfred Kroeber, a student of Boas, called culture superorganic, superindividual, meaning it exists beyond any single person. It has its own life, almost. You could study it even if the society that created it was fragmented.
That sounds like a powerful idea, especially given the circumstances.
It was. It allowed them to value and study cultural elements even when the social structures were breaking down. And Boas's other students, like Margaret Mead and Ruth Benedict, developed the Culture and Personality School.
Focusing on psychology.
Yeah, how cultural practices, especially early childhood experiences, shape personality types within a society.
So the American focus on culture as this robust thing was really a response to the devastation they were seeing.
You could definitely argue that. It provided a way to study and appreciate human diversity even when the social organisms the British school focused on were no longer intact. A really significant shift.
Okay, let's jump forward. After World War II, things started changing again, right?
Massively. That old idea of societies as stable, harmonious systems, shattered by the war, decolonization movements, global upheaval, history, conflict, power, they became much more central to anthropological analysis.
And critiques of the West started gaining traction.
Big time. People started questioning Western capitalism, the idea of Western science as purely objective. Edward Said's book Orientalism in 1978 was a landmark.
What did it argue?
It basically exposed how the West had constructed this biased, often degrading or overly romanticized image of the East, the Orient, to justify its own dominance.
And feminist scholars chimed in too.
Absolutely. They rightly called out the pervasive white male-centric viewpoint that had been presented as universal knowledge for so long. They showed how gender biases skewed research findings and theories.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? When you start including voices that were previously ignored, how does that change what we thought was truth?
It changes everything. And you also had critiques coming from Marxist perspectives, challenging capitalist assumptions about modernity and development. This led to a deep re-examination of core anthropological concepts.
Like the term tribe.
Exactly. Tribes started to be seen as problematic, often imposed by outsiders carrying colonial baggage. The term indigenous gained favor, seen as more politically correct, acknowledging histories of marginalization and dispossession.
And ideas about primitive societies were challenged.
Definitely. Ethnographic research showed that hunter-gatherer groups, often labeled primitive, actually had sophisticated knowledge, complex social lives, often lots of leisure time, and extensive trade networks. Many earlier classifications were revealed as artificial ethnocentric constructs.
What about the methods? The positivist idea of the objective observer.
That came under heavy fire, too. Critics argued it silenced the voices of the people being studied, privileging the scholar's interpretation.
Is there an example of that?
Corinne Kapadia's work in South India is a great one. She noted how standard kinship studies always centered on a male ego. But in her field work, she found marriage negotiations revolved around the girl, and people often trace kinship through female lines. A small detail, maybe, but it showed how a male-centric assumption shaped the entire framework.
So how did field work change?
It started to be seen not as objective data collection, but as an intersubjective interaction, a dialogue between the anthropologist and the people they work with. The anthropologist's own identity, their gender, background, politics, emotions, inevitably shapes that interaction and the knowledge produced.
So complete objectivity is impossible.
Many argue yes, especially when studying humans. The key insight became who is doing the research and how they interact with people fundamentally influences the outcome. It's about acknowledging that subjectivity, not pretending it doesn't exist.
Where does that leave anthropology today?
It's moved far beyond that initial science of man. There's much more emphasis on fluidity, complexity, self-reflection, or reflexivity by the researcher, recognizing that human lives don't fit neatly into rigid boxes.
So the definition is less about the subject matter, more about the approach.
Increasingly, yes. The methodology-intensive, qualitative fieldwork, trying to understand perspectives from the inside, that's become the defining characteristic. And it's breaking down disciplinary walls. Anthropology's insights and methods are influencing history, sociology, even medicine.
So for you listening, the takeaway is maybe that understanding societies isn't about finding single, fixed answers. It's about embracing complexity, multiple viewpoints, and seeing knowledge itself as something that evolves.
Precisely. Now let's zoom in on India. Anthropology arrived there formally in the 19th century, largely brought by British administrators and scholars studying local tribes and communities, often for colonial purposes.
But Indian scholars started getting involved too.
Yes, though it took time. Proper university departments started appearing in the early 20th century, training a generation of Indian anthropologists.
Let's break down its development in India, the formative phase first.
Yeah.
Roughly 1774 to 1919.
Right. This was about initial ethnographic documentation, lots of reports on customs, traditions, beliefs. Institutions like the Asiatic Society and the Anthropological Society of Bombay were publishing early work. Often the goal was practical, helping British officials understand the populations they governed. Think of projects like Risley's huge People of India survey.
Were there key scholars then? British and Indian?
On the British side, you had figures like W.H.R. Rivers studying the Todas, but crucially, Indian pioneers emerged. S.C. Roy is hugely important, the first recognized Indian ethnographer.
What was his focus?
He worked with tribal groups in Chotnagpur, documenting their lives, but also advocating for them. He saw anthropology as useful for nation building, for fostering understanding. He wasn't just an academic. LKA Ananthakrishna Iyer was another key early figure documenting castes and tribes in South India.
Okay, then the constructive phase, 1920 to 1949.
This saw more institution building. A proper department at Calcutta University, S.C. Roy, starting the Man in India Journal. Indian anthropologists like D.N. Majumdar and Irrawaddy Karv really started producing major work.
Majumdar had some interesting concepts.
Yes, he focused on culture contact and acculturation, how cultures change through interaction. He developed the MARC, Model Man Area Resource Cooperation, as a way to analyze how a society functions within its environment.
Man, area resource cooperation. Got it.
He argued for what he called creative adaptation for tribal groups, wanting integration based on respect, not just assimilation or letting them decline.
And Verrier-Elwin was active then too.
He was. British-born but spent his life in India working with tribal communities, particularly in central India. He wrote detailed ethnographies like the Baiga. He famously argued for protecting tribes from outside exploitation, even suggesting a policy of leaving some groups relatively isolated.
Controversial maybe, but born from seeing exploitation firsthand.
Exactly. And you also had figures like Christoph von Führer-Heimendorf, an Austrian ethnologist, doing long-term field work with groups like the Gonds, highlighting issues like land loss. This phase also saw the founding of the Anthropological Survey of India and the Delhi University Department really building the infrastructure for research.
Which leads to the analytical phase post-1950.
Right. After independence, the focus shifted, less purely descriptive tribal studies, more analytical work on village life, caste dynamics, the complexities of Indian society, lots of collaboration between Indian and foreign scholars, too.
And some really key concepts came out of this period, like Sanskritization.
Hugely influential concept from M. N. Srinivas. It describes the process where a lower status caste or group adopts the customs, rituals, even the lifestyle of a higher dominant caste to try and improve their own social standing over generations.
So upward mobility through cultural imitation, basically.
That's a good way to put it. It's about adopting the markers of prestige. Srinivas documented this across India.
What about L.P. Vidyarthi?
Vidyarthi developed the sacred complex framework. He used it to study pilgrimage centers like Gaya, analyzing them through their sacred geography, the rituals performed, sacred performances, and the religious personnel involved, sacred specialists. He showed how these centers integrate diverse people and traditions. He also studied tribal groups, developing the nature-man-spirit complex to understand their holistic worldview linking environment, society, and the supernatural.
Okay, McKim Marriott. Universalization and parochialization. Sounds complex.
Let's break it down. Building on ideas about great, wider, classical, and little local folk traditions, universalization is when elements from a little tradition, say a local deity or festival, get absorbed upwards into the great tradition, becoming more widely recognized, maybe even standardized.
And parochialization.
That's the opposite flow. Elements from the great tradition, a major religious text, a national holiday, get adopted downwards into the little tradition, taking on local meanings, specific local ways of being practiced. It's like localization.
So culture isn't just flowing one way. It's a two-way street between the local and the broad.
Exactly. Marriott showed how Indian civilization wasn't static, but involved this constant dynamic interplay between local practices and wider traditions. These concepts help us see how traditions live and change.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? How might processes like Sanskritization or this universalization-parochialization dynamic still be shaping cultures today, maybe even outside India?
That's a fantastic question for reflection. These aren't just historical concepts. They offer tools for thinking about cultural change everywhere.
Okay, fantastic. That was a lot to cover. Let's try and crystallize the main points for everyone listening. A quick recap for active recall.
Good idea. So point one, anthropology grew out of Europe's Age of Reason, a shift towards questioning and scientifically investigating human society, moving away from purely myth-based explanations.
Right. And those early theories, like Comte's stages or Spencer's survival of the fittest, were often positivist trying to be objective like natural science, but were also controversially used to justify things like colonialism.
Then the discipline formalized with figures like Tyler. Two major schools emerged. The British, focusing on social structure, function, and fieldwork, often linked to colonial administration.
And the American school, led by Boas, emphasizing cultural relativism, unique histories, historical particularism, and developing that robust concept of culture, partly in response to the disruption of Native American societies.
Post-WWII brought major critiques challenging Eurocentrism, questioning pure objectivity. Thinkers like said feminist scholars. This led to understanding fieldwork as an intersubjective process, shaped by the researcher's own position.
And finally, we dove into Indian anthropology's unique journey. The formative phase with pioneers like S.C. Roy, the constructive phase with institution building and scholars like Majumdar or R.C. Model and Elwin, and the analytical phase post-independence, giving us key concepts like Srinivas's Sanskritization, Vidyarthi's sacred complex, and Marriott's Universalization-Parochialization.
A rich and complex history both globally and in India.
Absolutely. So, wrapping up, what does this history mean for you listening right now? I think it shows that studying humanity isn't just about what we study, but how. Those methods, those perspectives are deeply shaped by historical context, by power, by who gets to ask the questions.
And knowing this history prompts further questions, isn't it? How does this change how you approach information about other cultures, or even your own? Given this complex past, what are the important questions anthropology should be tackling now?
Plenty to think about. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.